And now I would like to welcome Yan Jenny Wong from University of Birmingham, United Kingdom, with a presentation, Terminology, Acquisition and Individual Differences. Is there any relationship? Please, Jenny.
So my presentation is about terminology acquisition. And I would like to first start off with the introduction of the term modeling, because we all will be affected by models, role models in one way or another. And in this presentation, you will see that translation students are very much affected by their peer models. But then, first of all, what is modeling? If we draw on the educational psychologist theory, who is by the name of Albert Bandura, he proposed the concept of observational learning, which was very revolutionary at that time. And in some simple words, it means that we learn by observation, observing how others perform or how others behave, and among the theory, all the theories mentioned, something in particularly relevant to translation training is that we don't just learn from perfect models, but we learn from models who are similar to ourselves. So if we see others who are similar to us and perform a certain task, for example, a translation task, when they efficacy, that is the self-confidence, will also be increased as well. And so in modeling, it can be the learning process can be summarized in two phases. And that can be applied to language learning as well. That is, first of all, is the acquisition phase, and that is how to set focus on the model's behavior. And then the second phase is the performance phase, where the learners or the observers reproduce that behavior. And so we talked about models were similar to ourselves, but there are also mastery models who we see as a perfect model. For example, a translation student learns from his or her own teacher. Okay, so these are called mastery models, and they usually will perform a competent task, and then we have also coping models. Okay, so coping models can be considered as those who are not perfect. They can be the peers. They are similar in terms of competence to the students, but their influence and especially in terms of motivation will be even greater than mastery models, because they are seen as similar to the student themselves. So is there any work in translation studies that is drawing on the modeling effect, which leads to the individual differences in the learning process of terminologies? Actually, the closest one will be Don Curali. So Don Curali, he used a social constructive approach to the translation classroom. But then it was, I would say that although he went into great lengths into describing procedures, the effects of a social constructivist classroom on students' learning are only briefly discussed in his books. Okay, so it was also not in a quantitative sense. It is more of an observational sense. So in my experiments, in my research, I actually surveyed 3 groups of translation trainees who are at different levels of their learning. So I did the research on the postgraduate students at the University of Newcastle. So Y2 stands for the MA students, and then Y1 stands for the diploma year students. So prospective students are those who are just admitted to the program, to the program, which is a 2-year program. So after they completed first year, they will be called diploma year students. And then when it is in the second year of studies, then they will be called MA students. So, and then the way I do it is that I design a translation task, which consists of an equal number of Chinese sentences and English sentences. And then after giving them the task, I will give them the model translations, that is how the piece will be translated by different models. For example, a translation done by a teacher, translation done by a student with a name. Okay, so so then the model set actually contains 3 model translations for each sentence, compiled by 3 different authors. And I am surveying quantitatively how the translation trainee or use the terminologies that are in the model translations. So and then in the stage 2, in this research, the students are asked to translate the several sentences that contain the same expressions or same words that were used in the previous translation task, which was in stage 1. Okay, so so by then I can have a calculation of how much they actually model after those different models. Okay, so so in order to increase the reliability, I actually use ANOVA in order to test whether there are any sentences that are significantly preferred by students, and then if there is, then I will have to exclude that sentence. So I quantify those changes in translation by finding the number of unchanged lexical items under the denominator of the total words in the second draft. Okay, so by then I will be able to take a percentage change of the translation trainee. Okay. And I will also give them some questionnaires to see how socially oriented these translation students are, in order to find out the individual differences. For example, some who are more socially oriented according to the psychometric test, will that lead them to model more after those different models? Those who are less socially oriented, that is, they are more independent kind of person, will they have a lesser tendency to follow what the models try to translate? And so in the end, these are the results. So I found that on those prospective students, that is those who are just admitted to the MA program, there are a few significant factors that have a great influence on the translation learning. For example, their confidence in translation, and their social orientation, the perception of models. Okay, so all these actually mean that the more confident they are in their translation skills, actually the less they will follow the model translation. Okay, the less they will be influenced by the model translation, and the more they are socially oriented, the more they will also be likely to follow the model translations as well. And if they, for the factor, if they perceive the models highly, then that means they also have they are more appreciative of the peer model and more influenced by them as well. So and when we get to the year 1 diploma year students, and the factors are similar, but there are a few more factors. So confidence remain one important factor. And then what is added is also the peer learning attitude. If they are appreciative of learning from peers, then they will be more influenced by the peer models. And also in factor 6, that's quite interesting, because the more difficult they see the task, the more they are likely to follow the model translations. Okay. And then in factor 7, it can be, the conclusion can be drawn that the more confident when the students are more confident, then they will tend to turn to the teacher's model, okay, instead of following the model translations done by the students. And then last but not least, we go to the MA students. So so for the MA students, we can see that for the first factor, that is again relating to confidence. The more confident they are, the less they tend to follow the model translations. And also in factor 5, that is worth noting, the more they are socially oriented, the less they are drawn to the model whom they do not know by their name. Okay, so because, well, we can this is, I think, self-explanatory, because if they are more socially oriented, they tend to be drawn to be influenced by people who are whom they know well. And I think because of time, for the stage 2 result studies, after they are in the second task, where they are asked to translate the sentences with the same lexical items, same expressions as the previous task. So I'm trying to find out whether there are any imitation of the expressions of the lexical items that they learned in the first stage. Okay, and we found that there is a delayed imitation of efforts and adjectives among the diploma year students. And then interestingly, those adoptions from models did not show up in stage 1 research, actually appeared in the stage 2 research. And then we can also see that for those idioms, while there are idioms that appeared in the first stage, for example, pie in the sky, okay, these kinds of idioms that are quite difficult to be retained by the non-native English speakers, they did not show up in the second stage. In the second stage, they're asked to recall those idioms that they learned in stage 1, but then none of them showed up among the diploma year students. And the closest equivalence to pie in the sky is actually a changed format called cake in the air, which is non-existent in the English language. But when it comes to the MA year students who are at a more advanced level, so we can see that a lot of these students, they are able to turn to their model translation in the stage 1 research, but then only one of them could retain the technical term in the stage 2 research. And as for the retention of idioms, it is getting better. So exercise, no one student can reproduce the model translation. Okay, so it actually shows that the acquisition of terminologies so I think to conclude, the we can find some consistencies of modeling effects across different groups. And that is at whatever stages of the professional development, the translators' susceptibility to the role models is a function of the self-confidence and the perceived difficulty of the task. And that is quite consistent with this education experience or not so confident of the task. So they will easily be influenced by the models. So when translators, or if they themselves are not confident of the translation skills, they will be more susceptible or more easily influenced by also we can see that the factor of social orientation actually for for those less advanced students, and they are influenced by their social orientation more than those advanced students who are in the MA year. Because they are already at a more advanced stage, they are less influenced by those models as they become more confident of themselves and their own translation skills. And the last but not least, it appears that because the results, although the results show that the adoption from the teacher's translation is still more difficult translation task, they actually turn to the student's translation. They are more influenced by the student model than the others, and that is consistent with Albert Bandura's theory on observational learning, because those who experience difficulty are more likely to regard coping models as more similar to themselves than mastery ones. So actually that is quite revolutionary observation, because we teachers tend to think that we have a lot of influence on our translation students. But actually, when it comes to a more difficult task, students tend to be more influenced by their peers and learn from them. So I think that can create and open new avenues of research and also in new pedagogical approach in translation teaching.
Yes, so many thanks for this systematic field research and data analysis. So the research object was illustrated from different aspects, and surely the acquisition of terminology is not an easy task for translators.